Welcome back. Our session for today is on mental health, a conversation with Shaheen Bhatt and Jyotsna Mohan Bhargava, two wonderful and different authors with Tenzin Jamphil, where they share their perspective on mental health through books they have authored and also their own personal dealings with it. Shaheen Bhatt is a screenwriter and author of the best-selling book I've Never Been Unhappier. She is also the founder of Here Comes the Sun, a mental health awareness campaign to help address the stigma and discrimination around depression and anxiety. Jyotsna Mohan worked with NDTV for 15 years and rose to the position of senior news anchor and senior news editor. She's a columnist for newspapers and digital publications in India and abroad. She has authored the book Stoned, Shamed, Depressed, an explosive account of the lives of Indian teens.
Hello everyone. Welcome to this online discussion on mental health. And I'm first of all, I'd like to extend my gratitude to the Ladakh Literature Fest for having me part of this, and I'm extremely delighted to be moderating this panel of two wonderful authors here. First of all, I'd like to welcome Ms. Jyotsna Mohan. She is a senior journalist who's worked with NDTV for more than 15 years as a senior anchor. Mental health is one of those topics which I have a personal say in, and I'm quite happy to be able to talk about it freely, as I would have done it a few years back. And also, I understand like the importance to have a dialogue such as this more often as possible, and I'm sure in many places. But I think it's quite important, I would say, in Ladakh as well, because understanding of this is still not really understood. I mean, a lot of people don't understand about it, and also about the rising cases of the patients that have been coming in couple of last year. I mean, there are different factors to it. Of course, Ladakh being our economy is predominantly focused on seasonal earnings, and because of the ongoing pandemic, a lot of things have changed for them. And also, I think with social media coming in the mix is not making things much harder, much easier for anyone, especially for the younger kids now. So, today, what I'm hoping to achieve from this session is to get a more profound understanding of this disease in a short period of time as much as we can, and also I think to understand the different factors that contribute in this disease. So I think I'd like to start this session with Ms. Jyotsna, ma'am. I'd like to start with a question, if I may, and you can follow it with your talk after it. So, ma'am, I've heard you quite often talk about you were quite baffled about the amount of attention the kids are getting in serious issues. So my question to you is, does that somehow reflect the insecurity in our society when it comes to such matter?
Oh yeah, Jampal, actually I say that I've written this book in the context, it has to be read in the context of a society like ours. A society like ours that is so traditionally minded, a society that, it resists change more often than not, and it also has a very patriarchal mindset. To me, all of these factors actually combine, and, there's this undercurrent that I have tried to, keep it consistent through many of the issues that I've dealt with in the book. And I think mental health is one of them, for the simple reason that I find that, we are still resistant to issues that involve mental health with our children. And just to give you a very quick background, the book is it says it's about teens, but actually it's a huge demographic. It actually starts with 8-year-olds and it goes up to people in their 20s. I've got an immense feedback from millennials as well. So it's a demographic, actually, as I say, 15 to 50 to be read. But again, as I say, when you're teenagers and also 20-year-olds, I find that the reaction has been that what is the problem with these people? They're young, whatever, they have everything going for them. What are their worries? What are their problems? And I find that is compounding their issues because, as you mentioned, social media has changed the dynamics a lot. And given so you have to wait in the context of times that have changed. Times like ours, I'm sure there were issues. I'm sure there were people who have anxieties, but even now, this everybody, even older than me, everybody thinks that it's a stigma to go and seek help or get medication. But these children, I find, are different. They're actually craving to get help. They're looking to get help, but they don't quite know where to go because, again, in schools and colleges, counseling is limited. It's not something that is, let's just say, it's not something that is important, or at top of the hierarchy for our schools and colleges and educationists. So I think that's their bigger dilemma, is that they actually quite understand that they are going through issues, but they don't know how to deal with it, or how to go around a society that is possibly not going to accept it all the time.
Yeah. So I think now I'll shift to Shaheen. Again, I'll ask you, I'll pose a question to you, and then you can continue again with that. So, understanding that you've been under depression for quite a lot of time, quite a lot of years now, and there's this line in your book which resonated to me quite deeply, and which I'll quote to it, where you've mentioned saying, "I've been able to cultivate an awareness on my condition in myself, and it's the only way I've been able to rid myself of the shame those with mental illness are often plagued with." So my question would be is how important do you think is to understand the nature of the illness itself for someone under it and for someone who's looking? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most important things, right? Because it's how do you go about fixing something if you don't know what it is? How do you go about dealing with something if you don't know what you're dealing with? It's basically, it's like the old cliche, which is a known devil is better than an unknown devil. So it's very important to sort of understand the nature of the thing that you're dealing with. And it has been the thing for me that I've been in therapy now since I was 18 pretty much, and on a very consistent basis. In the pandemic, I realized I needed therapy a lot more. So I started doing therapy twice a week as opposed to once a week. It totally depends on where I am, but basically what that does for me is it helps me sort of understand where I am in my head, and I understand what my triggers are. I understand what the things are that are causing my low bouts, or sudden changes in my mood. And because I understand that, I'm able to go about figuring out how to deal with it. I'm able to, because I know a trigger, I know now how to avoid it. I know how to I know how to deal with it. And it's, for me, depression, like you said, it's been a thing that I've dealt with since I was 12 years old. And so over time, I've learned so much about myself. And in the process of writing the book also, I learned so much more about the nature of my depression, because everyone deals with depression in a completely different way, right? It's completely individual to you as a person, whatever your sort of historical references are, the way you've been brought up. There's so many factors that go into sort of informing the way that you will personally deal with depression. And so over the years, I've sort of learned the particular texture of my depression, and as a result of that, I've learned how to now deal with it a lot better. Obviously, there are days where I don't deal with it very well, because again, that's what depression is. It's I haven't got it all figured out. That's what I feel like it's really important to say, is just because I've dealt with it for a really long time, it doesn't mean I've figured it all out. It's something I have to do on a constant, ongoing basis, because it changes. It changes based on where I am in my life. It changes based on, me, how I'm changing. But yeah, it makes a huge difference to sort of just have a general understanding of what it is that you're dealing with. And I mean that on a psychological level as well as on a sort of a chemical level, because there are so many things that affect your mood in both ways, right? So I have psychological triggers, and then if I don't sleep, for example, I know that that's immediately going to set me off the next day. If I've had a bad night of sleep, I know immediately that sort of tends to affect my mood. So once you kind of get an understanding of those things, it helps you figure out what you need to do.
Just to follow up that, to you, ma'am, I just want to ask, now there's different types of depression. Like you tell, there's this, you've been clinically diagnosed, right, at a young age. And there's this, when you talk about chemical and then the psychological, is there a certain difference in that? And the therapy, do you go a different, like you go about in a different way or sort of?
Yeah, I mean, so the thing is, like, again, I always tell people also, like, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychiatrist, so I'm not like the best person to talk about, the various kinds of depression. But from my understanding of depression, yes, I do know that there are various triggers for it. For example, I can only speak for myself. Like, I'm only an expert in my own mind and what I feel the cause of my depression has been. So for me, I know it started off when I was 12, and I feel like I understand that it started off as a chemical thing. But because I dealt with it from the age of 12 now into my 30s, it became progressively more psychological. And which is why for me personally, I do two types of therapies. I do, like, I have medication as well as I do talk therapy. So for me, I find that one or the other in isolation doesn't necessarily help. I kind of need both things because for me, like I said, the causes are varied. It can be purely a physical cause, like I'm underslept, I'm not eating right, my immunity is low, and that can trigger something. Or because it's been so long that I've dealt with it, I will have an emotional trigger. Something will happen to me that will emotionally trigger me, and then it will send me into sort of a downward spiral. So yeah, there are various causes and various kinds of depression, and I guess that's also one of the things that makes it particularly hard to deal with, because there are so many causes of depression. There's not just one thing that it makes it particularly hard to diagnose as well, the cause of it. But yeah, for me, I can only speak personally for myself.
And ma'am, Jyotsna ma'am, what I'd like to ask is, like the journey to adulthood. In your book, you've written a lot about like the teens into the influence of social media and that stuff. So my question is, like, I just wanted to ask because I remember when life was spent in classroom and fields. But now, in today's world, where there's a strong influence of social media, right? And I remember me growing up in a very painfully normal, awkward, confused. But do you think now, due to the strong influence of social media, is the transitional space for them is altered a little?
I see this pandemic is actually been like a very hard lesson to learn, because, before the pandemic, we were telling all these children, leave the gadgets, get out of here, just go out, go play some more. And, I've got two children. So I've seen, initially when it happened and it all shifted to online studies, everybody the children were really excited. Oh, we don't have to go to school. We'll be on our iPads and our tablets, right? And now 8 months later, 10 months later, they are all so done. And it's ironical because now they're the same kids who are wanting to go out into the playground, who want their friends to meet them out for cycling or for, just whatever, badminton. So I find that it's been a really hard lesson to learn. However, I think as human beings, we tend to unlearn lessons very quickly. So I don't know how long that lesson will stay once things normalize, when they normalize. But everything is changed. And, to just go back to what Shaheen had mentioned, the fact that identifying a problem is crucial. Now, in our society, again, I'm going back to that society when we talked about that recent suicide of an actor. There were the kind of reactions you got were like, oh, but can you not see that he's smiling in this photo? He was absolutely normal. And that is the problem a lot of these children are facing, because they say just because we're outwardly smiling, and I think again Shaheen will agree with this, just because we're outwardly smiling, or at some point we're okay, doesn't mean that we're consistently okay or we don't have a problem. And the fact that everything is uploaded first on social media, it has to look good. They have to look good, and they have to get those instant gratification. They have to get those instant likes, and that obsession that if you get that few likes lesser than your best friend. I think the triggers in this generation are so different, but this peer pressure has, it's just evolved into something completely different. So of course you have those exam results as well that are going on with 100% expected in colleges, and that is putting the pressure differently. But it's a cycle. And of course, there's a lot of noise here. suddenly. Because I find it to be a cycle in the sense that, depression and drugs, these children, there's a linkage here. I actually know of a child who's done so well. He was a topper in school, and then he went on to lose 2 years in college because the parents can't figure out whether it was the anxiety or whether it was the drugs that he can't do without it. What is the linkage? And they actually say that at the end of the day, they would rather deal with his anxiety and depression and allow him to have that, have a joint here or two, if that keeps him going. So it's a very tricky place out there for this generation, very, very tricky, because the peer pressure in social media is, unlike anything we've seen, at least I've seen.
So this, I'll just give put out an open, open question to both of you. So we are living in the age of where our insecurities are being capitalized. How true would you say that statement stands? Any one of you can.
Yeah, I think like a lot of people, I also watched The Social Dilemma, which is the documentary on Netflix, which is about social media. And I think one of the things that really struck true for me when I watched that documentary is if you're using a product and you can't tell what the product is, if you're using a platform and you can't tell what the product is, it means you are the product. And we've been turned into products. And exactly like you said, our insecurities have been turned into products for capitalism and advertising and, the works. And, you've got, I don't know. The thing is, I feel like there's some days I'm like, you don't stand a shot, because you're up against like really powerful AI and computers that, know you better than actually you know yourself. There was a very sort of famous case of, I think, was it Amazon sort of realizing that a woman was pregnant before she realized it based on her purchases, like based on her purchases over the last 3 months. So a computer and an algorithm now knows you sort of better than you know yourself. And some days I'm like, you don't really stand a shot, because that algorithm doesn't care about you as a person. It just wants to exploit your insecurities to make sure that you buy the things that you think are going to make those insecurities go away. So clothes, skincare, fancy things that you think you need because that's going to make you feel better. But I also feel like we're kind of at, we're at a sort of a very crucial sort of crossroads right now, where we are, because we're aware of this. We now know this. Maybe 2 years ago, we thought of social media as being purely, wow, this is a means for connection. But now I think what we're realizing is that it's slowly actually going the other way. We think we're connecting with people on social media, but we're realizing it's unraveling our ability to connect. Because we're spending more time doing this and not actually talking physically to people anymore. So I think the fact that we now know this is great, and we're at a point where we can now sort of responsibly for ourselves decide how we want to use social media, how we want to use these platforms that can be very beneficial to us if we just figure out what our sort of boundaries. We have to set boundaries around them, basically. So. In a nutshell, I think that statement is very true.
Chapel, can I just add to that? Because, I also find that the whole thing, like, Shaheen said, it's social dilemma. I'm actually glad that my book came out before the documentary, so nobody could say, because I realized there were just so many parallels, and so I was really grateful it came out like a month before. But, to quote again from there, it's like, you're in a matrix and you don't quite realize you're in that matrix, right? And I think that's what's going on. And I think my generation, the problem is that we still consider it to be a toy ourselves. So, we can't really, how do we then monitor younger people who are exposed to so much more with unrestricted freedom, and still, for the simple reason that we don't take cyber safety seriously as well. So I think that's another big issue that is going on, because we don't take it seriously. We have underestimated privacy, and I think that is going to cause a lot of problems going forward, because I don't think anybody's gonna just yet take a turn and take a U-turn or something. Although I've also mentioned the fact that people like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates didn't quite allow their children to get on it, and they had that one old desktop in the kitchen. To give you an example, I was at my daughter's gymnastics class just before everything shut down, and there was this gentleman who had his young daughter there as well, and he was originally from Silicon Valley, and he was he had like this Nokia phone, okay, and he was like, I bought it for 60 quid. and because I'm not going to allow my kids to do it. So that's the whole thing. They're buying into our insecurity. They know what they're doing, but they won't do it to their own kids, and they won't do it to their own family. So I think it's up to us to be smarter about these things, and how we need to let our children use it. For that, I think we need to figure it out how we are using it initially, and that's how we're going to help them harness it responsibly. Because if you're giving your child a tablet at the age of 8, 9, and then trying to take it back at the age of 12, it's not happening. Aggression is so rampant today in our society. Again, it's something we won't accept. But 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds hitting back at their parents, the cops have been called. I personally know many instances like this. So I think it's a minefield out there. How we harness it is all up to us. And activism is great. I think it can be used in such good ways. There's so many children out there, older teens who are using it for activism, whether it's mental health or drug abuse and very different cases. But I think, yes, it boils down to how we look at it, how we process it, and how we let it play us.
Sure. Having said that, ma'am, with technology now and the advancement with the kids themselves and how they use it, do you think it's going to be more difficult for the parents to police it, check on them, or in the future?
Of course I do. I really do, for the simple reason that I think that, I think they can do a better job of it, I think again, this is personal. So my take is that we've got to be a little bit more stricter and give a little less freedom. All in good time. I find that, a child who is on a gadget at 15 versus a child who's on Instagram at 13, there's a huge difference. And to say that these things are only happening in the West is, it's a fallacy. Everything that's happening in the West is now happening in our country. That smartphone is instant. We're streaming the same shows. We're, watching the same Jenner sisters or, the Kardashians, whatever. Everything is the same role models. They're all on the same, wavelength today. So I think, as parents, but I've spoken to so many parents, Jumpal, and I'm fascinated how they say that privacy is overrated, how they don't care that they're predators on social media, how strangers are lurking. So many children have told me that, they've been approached, or they've leaked their nudes, and there's trust that we've just given into the trust, because again, it's grooming, right? And this is going through gaming as well, which again we don't understand in our country, but it's huge. Grooming is huge in our country, but as parents, I'm fascinated that nobody takes it seriously. So I'm really hoping that if they read the book, as my intent has been to just show them a mirror. We all will take our personal steps. Parenting is very personal. It's not a parenting book. How we take it forward is all up to us. But yeah, why should a child be forced to come on social media and expose all his vulnerabilities, or the fact that he's got mental or she's got mental health issues? Why are these things not being dealt at home, or within a fraternity that is offline? So I find that this is another problem, as I call it, sad fishing. They're playing out their emotions online, and it's really sad because, obviously they're trying to fill a void that they're not getting offline.
Sure, ma'am. So I'd like to ask Shaheen, ma'am. So I just want to understand self-acceptance, right? So you understanding, like, when you are under depression, there's a lot of negativity around you. There's a lot of it, like your self-confidence just plummets and your insecurities are heightened. So getting to that stage of self-acceptance, like how, many don't, some of them don't, and they just carry. I've seen a lot of people who are like, first of all, they are not even aware of what they are under. Self-acceptance is the last thing. So understanding that first, like how does it come about? Like you cultivate your own, like how you said it, and following that is, would you say once you get that self-acceptance, is that like a first step towards your recovery, sort of?
Yeah, so like I said, honestly, I haven't also yet reached the place of complete self-acceptance. It's like I said, it's a journey, and some days I accept myself more than I do on other days. And it really totally depends on where I am at emotionally. I think the number one thing that I worked on accepting was the fact that I was dealing with depression to begin with. That's the one thing that I have accepted to a much larger degree than anything else. There are obviously there are things like, when you talk about insecurities, my body image is still something that I really struggle with, and I struggle with very consistently. And around that, I haven't really managed to, get to the self-acceptance point of it yet. I'm trying to, you talk about body positivity. I'm just trying to reach body neutrality. I'm trying not to get to a place where I love it. I'm just trying to get to a place where I don't hate it actively, or I'm not thinking about it all the time. But the thing that I have learned to accept is the fact that depression is something that I deal with on an ongoing basis. And once I accepted that, it just made the process easier for the simple reason that I wasn't spending my energy fighting it. I was spending my energy then when I was having a bad day on figuring out how to get through that bad day. Like exactly like Jyotsna said, you spend so much time otherwise pretending you're fine. And, just because I'm wearing a smile, it doesn't mean that internally I'm okay. And that's what I was doing for the longest time. I was constantly pretending to be okay. And that energy that I was spending doing that, I could have spent on, soothing myself and looking after myself on days where I wasn't feeling good. So, I mean, for me, that was definitely step one in like my journey to healing. Like as soon as I accepted that, then I was able to sit and say, okay, now this is an ongoing thing that is happening in my life, and now how do I figure out what are the ways that I now have to deal with this? And through that, I realized the things I have to accept were also have to learn how to figure out my relationship with my body. I have to learn how to figure out my relationship with the world around me that I find sometimes quite, because I'm very introverted, and so I find socializing like something like this is also quite, I'm very used to it now because in a couple of months of like having done it regularly. But otherwise, initially, this was like impossible for me to sit and have a conversation with people like this. So it's been over time that I have slowly now learned that there are certain things I have to learn to accept about myself, and then through that acceptance I learn how to work around them, rather than pretending that these are like I'm constantly confident all the time and I have everything together. I now say, no, man, I'm scared. Like I'm really nervous about this thing that I have to do. And that is a form of self-acceptance. It's accepting that I'm not 100% comfortable in a situation, but that admitting to that then helps me figure out, okay, now I don't have to focus on pretending. I can now figure out how to work around that anxiety rather than hiding it.
Sure. Having said that, man, Jozna ma'am, you've talked about body shaming and all in your book as well, right? So I've seen body shaming really quite prevalent in most of the societies, including ours in Ladakh. And what I've noticed, the sad thing is, the person who's been like the victim of it, they get so used to it, they don't care much about like they being calling body shamed or whatever it was. But I just want to understand, does that have like more a deeper subconscious effect to him, which would later project in his later life? Like, will it later project in his later life? Just want to.
No, I think, of course, I find a huge link actually. I did while writing about body shaming and, anxiety and disorders like even, bulimia and anorexia and everything. But I find that, it's also, again, it all boils down, as I say, to the society that we've internalized it all humorously in a sense, kala, patla, mota, chota. I mean, I always laugh. Now I laugh and I say, the amount of time somebody called me thin and said that hasn't your mother fed you, I'd be a millionaire by now, honestly, I mean, I grew up hearing this one line that you're so thin, you're like a stick, you're like, and I see a little bit of that happening with my daughter as well. And, I see that frustration on her face because she's also got a tiny frame. And so, I mean, it's something that we just, I'm glad that there's talk about it, but I think, yeah, for, many people like Shaheen, I think body neutrality is the first step. I think body positivity, again, I've written about it, but I think it's far, far away for us because as a society, it's something that we first need to, accept it. We haven't accepted it. We have not accepted the fact that our children are bullied for body, or body shamed in schools because, we tend to dismiss it as a phase. This is something that happens and, they'll outgrow it. And, if they're upset about it, they'll forget about it. No, they're not. Simply because sexual bullying and cyberbullying has taken bullying to a whole different level today, that it's not the same as it was. And also the fact that, bullying is now 24/7. It wasn't like our time, you go to school, and then you get home and you're done. You have a little bit of respite till you deal with it the next day. It's constant. So for us, as a society, I think there's a lot of changes. Again, I also think we're at crossroads when it comes to our society dealing with all these changes of a generation that has grown up, surrounded by gadgets and social media. I mean, it's the way they are. And unfortunately, we can't take that away. But I think we have to understand, and we have to accept, normalize the existence of certain things. We have to take the stigma away from the fact that, people can get body shamed, that it is an issue, that we need to confront that issue, that if someone is body shamed, we cannot just simply dismiss it, because it then goes into very different issues. I mean, it's so many children, I've written about how they've casually self-harmed. And, so there are repercussions. And unless we accept it, how are we going to deal with it? So I always say that acceptance is a first step to anything. If you don't accept it, how are we going to look for solutions, honestly? So, I mean, and so many children, they're cutting their wrists, or they're drinking phenyl because, somebody called them overweight, or somebody just, photoshopped them to make them look bad. It's really a part of how strongly influenced this generation is. And I think we've really got to take this issue up very, very seriously. We've got to talk a lot more about mental health. We've got to talk a lot more about body shaming, because, some of the instances that I came across, they were heartbreaking. There are people who achieved so much professionally, and yet personally, the moment they go back home, they're a wreck, trying to figure out, how is it that, they can do all these multi deals over time, and, yet deal with issues with society that looks at them and, just looks and says that, you're not conventional. And unfortunately, everybody cannot be conventional. And I think that's where that's our biggest drawback. We tend to want everybody to conform. And if you don't conform, and that could be in a negative way. So for us, conforming again has been that mota chota patla, that kind of a talk. So I think, yes, I think body shaming and mental health has a big connection, I find it.
Would you like to add anything, Shaheen? Or...
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that's over time, that's what's happened with us in our society, where we've just sort of, and it's happened across the board. It's not just necessarily in India, it's across the board, where we've just, we've created these boxes over time, and we have this habit of slotting people into boxes based on, whatever metrics are important to us: height, weight, skin color, all of these things. And I mean, I think my first sort of memories of my depression also blossoming came with a very, very heavy dose of discomfort with my body. I remember, because I gained a lot of weight. I felt very ashamed. I, at the same time, stopped eating because kids were making fun of me in school. And, the thing is also, especially if you're talking about teenagers and the sort of body shaming in teens, kids are cruel. Kids are just cruel, because you don't understand at that age. I was cruel, as a teenager, without realizing it. There are things that I now look back on and think about, and I'm horrified at certain things I may have said to someone else, or, certain behaviors I may have exhibited, because I just didn't know any better at that age. And as a result of that, obviously, there are many kids that are inflicting harm upon other kids without really realizing what they're doing. To you, it doesn't seem like a very big deal, but it's sort of the roots of things, that insecurities that are going to sort of govern your life take hold at that age, because that's the age at which you're like really very impressionable. So I completely agree. I think there's a huge sort of correlation between body shaming and your view of your body and your mental health, because if you think about it, this is where you reside. Your whole life is experienced through this vessel, and you're going to obviously be very sensitive to any criticism about the vessel that you experience your world through, whether it's anything really. So it makes complete sense that somebody saying something about that, or shaming you for it, or feeling like it's not up to scratch. And also, I just want to touch upon very quickly. So your negative feelings about your body might not also necessarily have to do with your weight or your appearance. For me personally, a lot of it is I have chronic pain. I deal with a lot of pain in my body. And so as a result of that, I get, I've been ill very often. And so as a result of that, I feel like my body is also not on my side. So I have a very complicated relationship with my body as a result of a lot of stuff that I've gone through. But I completely agree that I think it's your connection with your body and has a lot to do with how you feel emotionally.
Uh, I think now we've come to the end of the session, and it is really nice to have both of you talk about it. So I'd like to say thank you so much, and I feel really, I mean, a bit more, insightful than I was before this. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you
Thank
to
you.
both of you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.